Fears are growing in business over the impact of a sanctions war between Europe, the US and Russia. We've seen gloomy comment today from BP and Renault. Joining me to discuss the situation is Neil Buckley, our East Europe editor. So tell us, Neil, what is the concern about the new tranche of sanctions from the European Union?
Well, what we're expecting today from the European Union is, for the first time, sanctions that would affect whole sectors of the Russian economy. So this is the beginning of what we've been calling phase 3 sanctions, moving from just hitting individuals and certain individual companies to whole sectors. And those are the energy sector, although it's oil, not gas, state-controlled banks, and the defence sector. So this takes sanctions to a whole new level and makes them much broader and therefore having a much bigger impact.
And what scope is there for Russia to retaliate, as has been suggested in the Kremlin-aligned newspaper Izvestia?
There is a report in Izvestia which seems to have some foundation that there are proposals for a bill in the Russian parliament that would allow Parliament to designate certain countries as aggressor states, and then in Russia, and then businesses from those countries would be barred from operating. And this particular article is talking about professional services firms, for example. Big Western accounting companies might be barred. But that's a proposal. We don't know, of course, whether that will get to the point of being accepted and implemented. But Jonathan, I know you've been looking at the potential impact on the City of London of the latest sanctions. What's your impression on the kind of impact that they might have?
There's very little clarity at the moment, so I think we haven't seen big reactions in share prices today. The skeleton in the closet, I guess, is the possibility of US sanctions against banks, which could be pretty far-reaching in terms of how it would affect their Western counterparties. We've recently seen a very large fine, about $9 billion against BNP for violating US sanctions over Sudan. We've also saw in 2012 a very unexpected fine for Standard Chartered for a series of dollar transactions which were routed via New York, but really didn't have any counterparty that was based in the US. My sense is that people are probably in the banking sector are very concerned about that because they don't regard the US regulatory system as being particularly predictable.
But one particular company that has flagged up the risks from sanctions today, as you mentioned earlier on, is BP, which owns nearly 20% of Rosneft, the big Russian oil company. What's BP saying, and what kind of impact could this have on them?
Well, BP has flagged up the risks of sanctions, which obviously has a certain piquancy at the moment. It said that they are large, very difficult to quantify. I think we need a little bit of a reality check on that. If you transpose that story with the one about the EU, it all looks bleaker and bleaker. But BP really has to give a fairly open-ended assessment of risks, and a huge number of risks will be covered in its statement as well as sanctions. What we do know is that Rosneft is covered by US sanctions, but they appear to be quite narrowly drawn at the moment. So there are particular strictures on any involvement by US financial institutions with Rosneft. There's also strictures are applied, restraints are applied to how it can raise money in US bond markets. But it's a fairly narrow set of criteria at the moment. I think the other problem that you have potentially with US sanctions is it very specifically applies to US citizens. Bob Dudley, who's the chief executive of BP, is a US citizen. But just to bat the ball back to you again, Neil, and broaden it out a little bit, how much do you think Russia is likely to have an animosity towards the UK particularly?
I don't think the UK is going to be a particular target or necessarily the worst hit. German businesses, for example, are very heavily intertwined with Russia. The extent of German trade with Russia is bigger than UK trade. And it's partly because German business has to some extent dropped its opposition to sanctions, or tempered its opposition, I think, under pressure from German Chancellor Angela Merkel. That has cleared the way for these bigger sanctions to be imposed. So I think actually they're going to hit everyone, and Russia is going to be, to some extent, equally unhappy with European states and the US now.
So no case there to short buns and buy gilts. But as always in markets where there's danger and risks, there's also opportunity. Thank you very much indeed, Neil.
Thank you.